To celebrate Black history, the Post and Courier once again is presenting a series of video interviews and podcasts featuring 12 dynamic leaders to know in South Carolina. We talk to people from all over the state about their efforts to advance social justice, celebrate Black culture and enterprise, address community needs, and create a better world. Our videos and podcasts will be released monthly through January 2023. To watch or to listen, and to read feature stories about major civil rights milestones, South Carolina's pantheon of social justice warriors, and more, go to postandcourier.com/Black History. Join us again this year in learning about some of our state's remarkable change agents.
Hello, I am Rickey Dennis, and we are here for another series featuring another prominent leader in our community as we continue to highlight African American leaders throughout the Charleston area and the state of South Carolina. And I am grateful to be present with Dr. Tamara Butler, the Executive Director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. Dr. Butler, welcome.
Thank you.
So good to see you and meet you in the flesh.
Thank you.
Well, I'll let you just tell the people where we are.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited that we were able to do this. We are here in the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture, which is always a mouthful, located at 125 Bull Street. We're in a building that was built 1868. The school was originally created in 1865. As the Avery Institute. So it was a private school, post-emancipation, built by Black people for Black people. There's fingerprints in some of our bricks. We've identified 2. We're always looking for more, and just to think about the idea of us being in a space that historically has always put education at the center of community uplift. And so we became a high school in 1947, a public high school, and then closed in 1954. And so most of our students went on to Burke High School. In 1990, October 1990, we reopened our doors thanks to the Avery Institute for Afro-American History and Culture, alumni, community members coming together, and they were able to advocate and save the building, working in partnership with the College of Charleston, and now we get the birth and the opening of the Avery Research Center. By our founding director is the late Dr. Myrtle Glasgow, and so we've been here since the 90s, continuing to educate, collect, preserve, and promote African American history and culture.
And there aren't a lot of spaces like this in Charleston.
There are 0. I mean, for the work we do, there are. I'm excited about the new International African American Museum that's coming. We have several historic sites. I think, as most people know, McLeod Plantation, the historic site, does a really good job of highlighting. But for us, we're the only space that's an archive, a library, and a museum dedicated to the African American experience and the African diaspora that's also free. So admission, there's no charge. Most times if there is a cover charge to get into the club, to get into Avery, it's usually to help community members. So sometimes we do donation drives or mutual aid, but as of right now, we hope to keep it that way, that we don't have to charge an admission fee. So people could come in and dig through the archives and enjoy art and programs here at the Avery.
Now, you all have had some renovation work, and there was some opening and reopening and that sort of stuff with COVID and all of that. So what's the status now?
Yes, so a lot of things have unfolded. When I came, we were closed. Thank you, COVID, 19, 20, and 21 for your arrival. But when I came, they had just reopened in that spring. So in the spring of 2020, just reopened the doors. We're very excited. COVID came through and closed, but Avery never stopped working. So we transitioned to the Avery Digital Classroom, really trying to get a lot of virtual programming going. That sustained us. We also got a really great way to engage with community members who aren't here in Charleston. So people internationally, people in the state. And then we had another mishap where we had termites. They had turned our floor into an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yikes.
So we had to pull our archives out of that space and move them. But what we can say is we are termite-free. We are open. Yesterday, not too long ago, we've had a couple of community meetings. We've had a couple of events that we've partnered on. And so we're just in the process of rethinking how we will reopen, in terms of a larger opening for us.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna talk some more about the Avery towards the end, but we want to talk about you.
Okay.
And your life and all of that good stuff, because when you came to the Avery, this was by far not your first time being in Charleston at all.
Oh.
You're from here, grew up on Johns Island. So let's just start at the beginning. Talk to us about your growing up years, your early influences, and what life was like growing up.
Gosh, when people say that, I was like, long ago, far away. So I was like, man, I feel old. But I mean, I grew up on Johns Island. I was a traveling kid. Yeah. So when I was younger, I started at the John and Maddie Washington Preschool, which was attached to Hebrew and Zion Presbyterian Church. Yeah. So it was a lot of like devotions, and I think, like I said, one of the things that really helped me here was being able to the kind of memorization. So, constantly reciting the 23rd Psalms or the Pledge of Allegiance to the Bible, or like those kinds of engagements really helped me think about words. And then also to be able to think about like how that kind of reperformance and representation of words got attention. So it's like, so people would be like, can you recite the 23rd Psalm? And I would do it on dime. I'm like, yes. Yeah. Let me show you. But I was also always involved in church. So when the summers when I wasn't here, starting at about, 2 or 3, a lot of my family lived in New York. So I would take the bus with my aunt, or we would drive in the box Chevy, up 95 to New York. And then from there we traveled. So it was just this idea, and that travel was made possible through her church. And so I think that was also a really big influence for me, was like how churches and community may open the doorway. So I did that up until I was 12. So I went from John and Maddie Washington Preschool to Mount Zion Elementary School to School of the Arts. And so in all of those, I feel like the church community, specifically Hebrew and Zion, and then when I was in New York, it was Rush Temple, AME, Zion.
You better shut up your church names.
That's
all right.
Like those, they really wanted to make sure that folks traveled, and as a result, I got to tag along. So, it was with that group of community members and friends that I got to go to Hawaii, that I got to go to, Virginia Beach and Canada. And so I've never been afraid to travel. I've been afraid of getting lost, but I've never been afraid of travel, and to know that you have a whole community behind you who's willing to like help fund and support that travel. And that kind of exposure. I just hope to one day to keep that going.
The mission of the YMCA is to develop all people in spirit, mind, and body. We would ask that you consider a contribution to the YMCA so that we may help those that are less served. Please donate, and may God continue to bless you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. See, now I'm going to put on my preacher's collar now. And I'm not going to dwell on this because I don't want to take up the whole interview, but I think there's something to be said about how, the Black church played such a prominent role in shaping you and molding you at an early age, where you learned, to speak publicly and began to sense that you had that gift of memorization, because I think that's kind of lacking when it comes to the church today. So I don't know, this is more of an observation more than it is a question. But I just think that that's very, very powerful. And one thing you talked about too in your growing up years, as it relates to education, is how, a lot of the history and the culture that you learned came more so from the church and not really from the school system. So talk about that, and you can even maybe transition into kind of when you went to college and began to learn all of this Black history that you didn't learn growing up here in Charleston.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same. So I think there's so part of it is my family is there. None of them are formally trained historians. In my immediate family, but there was a couple different things that happened as a child that I remember. One is my aunt, because she lived in New York. I think there's all these street vendors, and I don't remember her ever saying the bookstore she got this from. So I assume that it's just the people who set up on Jamaica Avenue, and somebody selling perfume, somebody selling like Avon products, and then somebody selling these like Black history books. And she sent me a couple things. She sent me those like memory games with the cards that you flip, and the answers are on one side and the questions on the other. Is that this like book of like Black historical women, and then like 100 things you didn't know about African American history. And so the fact that, like I said, it's that kind of that conversation between New York and Charleston. That was one thing that I remember very clearly, is that they wanted us to understand our history, and then the kind of like writing. So because we were in church all the time. In New York more so, because my aunt was on the usher board and the deacon board, so we were there on the week. We're running copies. I'll never forget the smell of like the Xerox copy machine, like that hot ink paper, and you fold in programs all day. And so it was that. So it's like I was always engaging in words. Like I wanted to read the programs and fold it. It's the picture of the church is on the outside. But then when you get in church, the program now turns into kind of a teaching text. So my mom has been administrative assistant for a long time. She used to work at Medical University and then eventually Rural Mission, and she writes shorthand. So she wrote shorthand, but she would also like give me things to trace. So I kind of inherited she would like shorthand the scriptures and whatever's in the program, and I would just kind of trace them, or I would draw and doodle. My aunt did the same thing. Like she would write. She was an underwriter for an insurance company. And so she was always using things to distract me. And it was usually the church program. Right? So it's just thinking about how we use these kinds of informal texts to teach. And that helped because I also had an interest in the differences between the denominations. So I grew up in a Presbyterian church, went to an AME Zion church. And then when it's time for college, I choose the only historically Black Catholic university in the US. And I was like, it's because I want to go to med school, and they got the best program. So I go there, and it's another opening. Even though I have relatives who are in New York who are attending Catholic churches, attending Mass. Some are involved in like Nigerian Christian churches as well. And so it was a beautiful moment to attend Xavier. And it's like, how does religion show up again in the work that we're doing? And it was the first time that I had to take a theology class. It was a required course. So we're reading Da Vinci Code, and we're in conversation with nuns. Like they're literally Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament teaching the classes and walking around. And so you really learn like what are the differences between our practices. And then as a result, it opened this bigger question of like, what are the differences between who we are, and are they really that wide, right? Like, are they that deep? So it was an eye-opening experience. I was just like, I'm going to this Catholic school, it's going to be, like Catholic school dresses and uniforms, but it was a freedom to be yourself and know that the whole reason Xavier's birth is because Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament and Catherine Drexel, St. Catherine Drexel, believed in educating African Americans, indigenous peoples, and that's like the whole crux of the university. And to this day, it's founded in 1925. To this day, there's not one, at least for me, I didn't feel like there was not one Xavier faculty member who did not believe in the well-being of Black students. And so I think, there's an assumption that we see at a lot of schools where it's like, oh, if we just hire more Black faculty, will transform the school. And I was like, I don't remember. I was like, I might have had 5 or 6 Black faculty members in that 4-year span. But I knew for a fact that every single faculty member that I met wanted me to succeed. One of our favorite is this German professor who taught chemistry class, Heike Geisler, who was like, y'all need to hurry up because I need to get home to watch Gilmore Girls, you know, like get these titrations done. And she would just she allowed us to be ourselves. So we're doing titrations with ice cream in chemistry lab, listening to whatever music we want. You know, and so I just think that that's the kind of space where it's like, I want you to be who you are while being who you're gonna become, right? I'm hoping you all will become chemists one day, right? And that there's no wrong way to be a chemist. So yes, it's okay if we're gonna be listening to Juvenile, you know, while doing these titrations. But at the end of the day, it's to teach that science is fun and that this is a possibility. So it was also that really beautiful dynamic that I think really opened up for me. I didn't think I was going to be an educator, but being surrounded by so many people who were educating in all these different ways, I was like, this might be a possibility.
And they love Juvenile.
We just saw Juvie, and people in New Orleans like, we see him all the time.
Really? Wow. Gosh, I was, sidebar commercial break, I was in New Orleans. I must have heard back that thing up to the clean version for the Post and Courier. Probably about 20 times while I was down there. Just people in their cars, just blast. I mean, they love their music, and it was just impressive to see. You told a story. I think it was while you were still at Xavier, where a professor of yours gave you a CD that I guess the group singing or on the record was a group that you had seen kind of growing up on Johns Island, and that kind of, I guess in some ways, got you in a beginning stages of an awareness of, wow, this area, this community that I'm from is really being studied by scholars and researchers. And I'm not sure that, you know, folks in our community are aware of that. And even if have that same kind of knowledge or appreciation that these folks from illustrious institutions around the world have. So talk about that kind of experience and how that kind of propelled you on this journey of, you know, learning more and more about the history here in the Low Country.
I mean, I went to, it's amazing to leave home and see people's complete fascination and like being astonished, like just admiration for a place. I'm like, I mean, it's Johns Island, like, no biggie. But my professor at Xavier was Darif Jameson, who, I don't know how we got into this conversation, but I was just like, I'm from Johns Island, you know, I'm from Charleston. And his eyes kind of lit. He was like, you're from where? He was like, have you seen the movie Daughters of the Dust? He was like, did you know that's like one of my favorite movies? It's such a beautiful film. And I was like, who? What? I don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, he's also the first person to introduce me that I can remember to like these kind of like Black films. So, you know, we watched Sankofa, we watched Daughters of the Dust. And so we had these conversations about like, what does it mean to remember history through camera and through lens? And it was also dynamic because he was probably the second, because my first Black male teacher was my math teacher in middle school, but he was my first like Black male professor that I've ever had. And the kind of conversations, I would live in his office. We email every now and then, and I'm just like, he was like, I remember you would always ask, like, is there extra work I could do? Is something else I could read? And I was like, it's because you also took an interest in who I am, right? Like, you're the one who helped me see, like, Johns Island is not just an island. Even though my family had already instilled that, it's like, it's a place of study. Like, the Sea Islands have been documented and represented on screen, you know, not just by anybody, but by Black women, right? And so, and it's been remembered later, I find out it's been remembered through all these Black women writers who are just like, the Sea Islands is home for us, right? And so that, for me, that's why I said it. So it was that kind of introduction, and then he's the person that continued to talk to say, should I go to grad school? Like, is Black studies a thing? Because he's also a person who's like, I have a degree in Black studies. I was like, wait, you can do that? And so I take his advice and advice of the late Dr. Cannon, Katie Cannon. And I ask her, once again, in church. She's like, you know, West Coast, Midwest. I end up in the Midwest, and a place I had never been before. I was like, even though people know about Motown, right, and we know about Chicago, I was just like, where are the black people? And people like a lot of like the Ohio players, all your black music also comes from the Midwest.
Absolutely.
So it was just a great experience to also be in conversation with all these Atlantic world scholars who are just like, your home has been part of like really the epicenter of Black studies, you know, and it's not just new, right? So it's not just the ethnomusicologists who are studying it in the 20s and the 30s, you know, and Lorenzo Dow Turner looking at language. It's people looking at Black majority, like Peter Wood. It's people looking like Daniel Littlefield looking at rice and slaves. Like it's been where you from has been written about. And I was like, that's amazing and upsetting. Because I've never heard any of these names before. But if I was smart, all those names existed in my best friend's mother's library.
Wow.
She was a social studies teacher at the time, Cecilia Byers, and she had all those books. Right, and I'm pretty sure she was introducing all of her students to that material. So, so I still visited. She passed away. And before that, she had been giving me all this stuff. And so I have, you know, I think I have her copy of Rice and Slaves. She gave me a couple more books. But it was just that idea that there were people who were teaching it. Unfortunately, you know, we didn't officially cross paths in classrooms.
Expected is not feeling the love from your bank.
Hi, I'm calling about my credit card rewards.
I'm sorry, those rewards are not for you.
Wait, what?
Thank you.
That's not nice.
Unexpected is a bank that gives you double the love.
With my new TD Double Up credit card, I really get double cash back.
You do.
Wow. You guys, love me.
We actually do.
I love you too. Wow. Never said that fast before.
Introducing the TD Double Up credit card. Earn up to 2% cash back. TD Bank, unexpectedly human.
For those who don't know, grad school for you was
the Ohio State.
Right. And then your PhD was at
same place.
At Ohio State as well.
Yep.
Okay. So I think it was after you got your PhD, of course you had been traveling, but you talked about an experience overseas. I think we visited Puerto Rico and responding to the Hurricane Maria, I think it was 2017. And so as we're talking about this history of the Sea Islands, you kind of begin to develop this way of thinking that, hey, this, you know, the issues that, you know, the folks on the Sea Islands face are similar issues being faced by, you know, communities and countries abroad. So just kind of talk about that experience and that connection and why that kind of international kind of understanding is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were going to come up with solutions to our biggest issues. So in Charleston, some of them are flooding. Some of it is displacement. All of those things go hand in hand. How do we deal with water safety and all of these different things? It's watching a place that is literally an island, right? Like Johns Island is an island. Edisto, Wabmala, we are still connected by bridge. There's no bridge, you know, there are no bridges in Puerto Rico in that regard. And so it's like, well, what kind of way are our community members still managing to sustain, but also what do they need? And so after Hurricane Maria, I was with several colleagues. It was a project really birthed out of the deep concern. Because there's a population of Latin community members in Puerto Rico, in Michigan, and also thinking about folks, indigenous and Latin communities in Michigan, but also that connection in Puerto Rico. And so a lot of colleagues have family in PR, and connections and organizations they were working with who kind of went off the grid after Maria. And so it was an opportunity to go in and figure out, like, what do you all need? What happened? Where did systems go wrong and fail you? So even when we visited, I think we visited in 2018, like in March of 2018, communities still didn't have lights, right? This hurricane comes through in September, you know, of the previous year, and I'm just like, what do you mean? Or there's still places with the roofs covered. So another part that made me realize is attended Xavier my senior year began the year that Hurricane Katrina came through.
Right.
So to return to New Orleans in 2006, and if you come out of those clouds, you're over Lake Pontchartrain and you do all this kind of circling, and all you see are blue tarps.
Yeah.
When you get to Puerto Rico and you don't really see it when you're flying in, but you see it when you finally get in a car and you're in the mountains, right? And you're driving through communities, and I'm like, I've seen this blue tarp before.
Yeah.
I keep seeing blue tarp. Why are these communities being abandoned? Like, why is this still happening? And what we found in our work was we went to a community, an Afro-descendant community named Louisa, which is outside of San Juan. And the people who were doing most of the heavy lifting there, and we went to Caguas, we went to Kabui, we went like all across the island, are women.
Yeah.
Right? It's Afro-descendant women. Literally pulling the boxes of filters off the trucks.
Yeah.
We're there, and they're like, we're just so glad you're here. Most of them had shared that they didn't talk about the hurricane. They were like, this is the first time we've talked about it since it happened. And they were like, we see each other all the time, but it's not something we want to talk about. And so thinking about that kind of embedded trauma, and I'm like, how many communities have that same kind of like, I have a traumatic experience, but I want to continue to try to express and share joy. Like, the women showed up one day with fryers. My weakness is bacalaito and bacalao. And so they showed up, and I was like, it's hot out here, but I'm going to eat this fried cod fritters. Like, I'm going to get in there. And that's how people showed care. And so I was like, in the midst of all of this, this abandonment, all of the materials that were brought to Puerto Rico and just left to rot in trailers and things because people just couldn't get it out to the island fast enough. This community still managed to sustain. And I just think about it here. I'm like, we have so much work to do. And so not to get isolated, but to remind us that we are deeply connected. In hurricanes, not just because we experience them, but hurricanes are usually what changes our demographics. Right? I talked to a group in Boston, and they were like, most of our students that have come in were because they came from communities that have been destroyed by hurricanes. And so now you get a lot of Caribbean community members living in these different places. So we gotta figure out a way to see hurricanes. Yes, they're dangerous, but they are really the driving force for the diaspora.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to, issues related to flooding and other climate issues, of course, communities of color deal with a whole range of problems. And we've seen that in Charleston, particularly over the past couple of years. You arrived to the Avery at a very just critical time. In addition to COVID, of course, throughout the United States, just observing police brutality and killings and the protests we've been seeing here in Charleston. Of course, this is all, post Walter Scott, then the George Floyd and all of that, post Emmanuel. And the Avery has really been involved in kind of studying and tracking that activism and that response. So talk a little bit about that, kind of just your thoughts in terms of what you have seen in terms of Charleston's response to those issues.
Yeah, I think there's, right before I arrived, they had completed and distributed the disparities report, right? So the racial justice, race and social justice disparities report is in there, and it looks in documenting those these kind of like the disparities in healthcare, education, housing, definitely police brutality and violence. And so that's important because what you find is that it's informing activism, right? A lot of our activists are already on the ground, but we want people to know that there's data to back up some of the things that they're asking for. And because people are like, well, we need the numbers, right? We need the proof. And we're like, I don't really know if this is proof, but it's definitely evidence, right? It's definitely showing something, that something is awry in the ways that we're failing our students in education, the ways that we're displacing people in housing and employment, denying access to quality health care. And so that kind of becomes this, very vital document to demonstrate to Charleston that regardless of what you want to say you're doing at the policy level, this reflects something way different. right? We've said that we have legislation that has drastically changed and improved the lives of people. And I'm like, how can it? When we see that a good chunk of the schools on the peninsula are Title I schools, right? So what have we done in terms of working class community members? If you increase the rent, now they're displaced. What's going to happen to these schools? What's going to happen to these students? Or the fact that I'm working with folks who are looking at the fact that a lot of Title I schools are also located in flood zones, right? So what does that say about the communities in which the students are learning and living? What are we doing to equip them to talk directly to people about the issues? And so Avery has really been rallying around that, as well as making sure we help people understand that the activism we see in Charleston is not new.
Absolutely.
Right, and it doesn't start and stop with MLK's visit to Charleston. It doesn't start and stop with the hospital workers, that it goes farther back. And that it continues into the future. So for us, we were able to work with one of our former graduate students, Joshua Parks, and now our research archivist, Erica Veal, and we kind of came together and developed the grant, the Documenting the Arc, which was funded by the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. And they decided that we wanted to document that kind of activism post the Emanuel 9 massacre and post Walter Scott. And so what we wanted to make sure is made room for people to tell their stories. You know, our archives contain so much of the history. It contains so much around the activism of the 50s and the 40s, civil rights and beyond. And we wanted to share that civil rights has not stopped. That's not a fight that we've ever ended. And so it's allowed us to not only do interviews with over 30 organizers, activists, community members, artists, but also it's opened up a pathway for us to make room for community members to just drop in. So we have like a portal where people could just drop their stories into artwork, reflections, because we feel that sometimes people don't want to get in front of the camera, but they do have something they want to share. So we wanted to make space for individuals to speak back against, you know, in the wake of all of this racial violence, that there was joy, or there were reflections, or there was music, and also that there might have been experiences that just never made it to a camera. And so that's what we're hoping for, that people will see that Avery tries to work at different levels, right? We want to be able to give the documentation of the disparities, also make room and offer a platform for people to speak against those disparities, and then hopefully bring all those folks together to some tables with the folks who make policy and say, what are we gonna do now? Right, like what are we gonna do different? Because none of these things should happen again. We shouldn't see any more mass shootings. We shouldn't see any more kind of like over-policing, under-educating, underfunding our schools. We shouldn't see that anymore. Because we have the data, and that's 15 years of data. Where are we now? So
we know the problem.
We do.
We know the problem. It's about a willingness to address it. So as we prepare to wrap up, speaking of mid-20th century activism, you all did get a collection that includes, which I'm very excited about, a recording of a speech from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he visited Charleston, I think it was 1967, at the County Hall. So just shed some light on that collection and its importance, and what folks will be able to learn from it.
I mean, the thing I have to say, there's two things I want to say. I'm deeply grateful to Aisha Heichel, our manager of archival services, because it seems like Avery has been on the hunt for that recording for several years. And so once it was purchased and we were outbidded, she managed to stay in contact with the family. And so the Bermans were gracious enough. It was a visit that happened that came to South Carolina. They visited, Lisa Berman visited South Carolina. I think she went to a couple different places, but I don't know, I feel like that was her first visit to Avery. And it was in that moment of kind of talking to staff seeing where the Eugene Sloan's recordings was like the puzzle, the missing puzzle piece, right? We have photographs of Mary Moultrie, we have photographs of Coretta King, we have all of these materials, and it's like right here is where King can go to demonstrate that that the grassroots organizing that has always been present makes his visit possible. And so, you know, we talked, and next thing I know, I get a phone call. Like, I just went to the store. And I came out of the store, and I have this voicemail, and I was just like, I wanted to cry a little bit in my car, because I was just like, it wasn't anything that I did, right? The building and the staff and the faculty here speak for themselves. You know, the work they do, that we've been trusted to be good stewards. And I say this in my talks, I say this every time, that my goal is to bring our materials home, right? Bring our collections home. I said I wasn't gonna cry, but dang, y'all gonna make me cry on camera. But you know, it's just, for me, it's that. Our history is everywhere. It's scattered everywhere. And I think it's important to bring our history back. So yeah, I'm very excited. We've played it like 3 times in this auditorium. We played that. We have the collection. We have the recording of MLK. So my staff is actually more excited about Jackie Jefferson's Esau Jenkins' granddaughter. They're more excited about like her speech, right, than King. I mean, but also when you listen to King, you're like, oh, okay, like it's a no holds barred situation around what he has to say. So there's that part, and then there's also this recording of this kind of recording of a KKK rally that happens before his speech, and for us, it's the juxtaposition in eloquence. And like, it's a lot of non sequiturs in the KKK rally. Like it's these odd stories that are being told that's supposed to like conjure up fear of Black people, and cast King in this really negative light. And I was like, this is so strange. And then there's also a lot of like disjointed moments, which is like more cacophony. And then there's this longer speech by Ralph Abernathy that we also have. And so I'm also excited because it's the first year that we have a student who is from North Charleston, Kevon Singleton, who is a Morehouse student. I had to do that for Darren Lee Calhoun, who won't let me live down that he's a Morehouse alum. But so Kevon has transcribed that, transcribing those interviews. So to kind of have people who are in that legacy, that connectiveness, to think about like this happened here by King, and I get to actually be here upon its arrival, and now help it to live here at Avery, because it came to us partially transcribed, but he completed the transcriptions. And so we're just excited to bring it to life. And we hope that it will be, for us, a signal to folks that, yes, we want more, you know, MLK and major leaders, but we also want to hear from all the local leaders. Like, where were you on the night that King spoke? You know, where were you when Abernathy spoke? That's something we're hoping for. So.
Powerful stuff. Dr. Tamara Butler, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
So a lot of what I do is very complex. I write about animals, conservation, things like that. And so I really try to talk to the experts and take what they say and make it more understandable for the everyday person. I work very closely with conservation groups, local universities. Now I'm actually talking with the National Weather Service on a regular basis just to make sure that the information that I'm reporting is actually facts and not just opinion-based. I see that a lot of people really respect the Post and Courier, and not just here in Charleston, but all over the state. I've seen a lot of comments and heard a lot of comments that what we're doing is better than any other outlet, and people look to us for facts, accurate news.